Hello there. We're going to look at our first reading for this week. Our first week reading is from Zechariah. We are going to be looking at chapters 9 through 12. Zechariah is really close to the end of the Old Testament. It's actually the second book to the end of the Old Testament. So if you want to go get your Bibles and read along with me, that would be great. And you could find it. If you got to Matthew, you went too far. So it's really towards close to the end of it, the Old Testament there. All right, and so Zechariah is another one of the prophets, and he's following. We talked about Jeremiah last week. Zechariah is a little bit farther on in terms of the time scale. And what has happened is that we have a change in power now. Remember, we talked about the fighting between Assyria and the Egyptians and the Babylonians won. And the Babylonians were, one of the things that they did was anytime they conquered people, they brought them to their country. Okay, so they left the people who maybe could take care of land, and and the people who are not educated, so to speak, for that time. But anyone who had anything that they could offer the empire, they took them back, and so that was. You could imagine the melting pot of the city of Babylonia, that it had all these people from all these conquering nations. They ruled for a good 70 years or so, and then Cyrus from Persia came along and wiped them all out. And the Persians had a different different way about them. Is what they did is they allowed the people from the conquering countries go back and live in their own lands, as long as they also paid tribute to Persia. So they let the people go, and they also allowed them to practice in their own faith. And so Cyrus is sometimes, is found in, especially in the Old Testament, is this, benevolent ruler. But they were harsh too. You didn't want to mess with the Persians. There is a reason why they rose to power. They did not rise to power on, just on their, good graces. They were ruthless too. And so the book of Zechariah is really separated into two parts. The first part, from chapters 1 to 8, is probably that early return of the people of Israel back to their really destroyed nation. The temple is wiped out, is destroyed. The walls are torn down in Jerusalem. It's just a mess. And so it's really a time of hope for them. They can rebuild things and maybe become, back to, the strong nation that they were to come. That what didn't turn into the case. The second part, from 9 and through the rest of the chapters through 14, is probably written by a different person than Zechariah, because it talks about things that happened, centuries later, and that the hope is that they had initially returning is now really sort of gone. They hoped that the monarchy would be restored to David. Well, that didn't happen. They did rebuild the temple, so now they had a central place to worship, but it was not nearly as fine as Solomon built. And again, that they would take their place back in the world of power, and that just didn't happen. And it didn't happen even through that time of Jesus, between the Greeks and then the Romans taking the power. So that's sort of is the world of that you see in Zechariah, and we'll talk a little bit more about this. But let's read what Zechariah says from chapter 9 through 12. Rejoice greatly, O daughter Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter Jerusalem. Lo, your king comes to you. Triumphant and victorious is he, humbled and riding on a donkey, on a colt of a foal of a donkey. He will cut off the chariot from Ephraim and a war horse from Jerusalem, and the battle bow shall be cut off, and he shall command peace to the nations. His dominion shall be from sea to sea, and from the river to the ends of the earth. As for you also, because of the blood of my covenant with you, I will set your prisoners free from the waterless pit. Return to your stronghold, O prisoners of hope. Today I will declare, I will restore you to double. All right. So, as we read these things, especially, especially when we go into the Old Testament a little bit, we have to understand that, this is written, in a different time period, and some of the meanings of these words would have, meanings to the people back then. They would understand it right away, where we would be going, what was that? And you have to understand that when we get to the New Testament readings, and the people during Jesus's time would understand, because the Old Testament was the only thing that was written, they would understand those references to a victorious king riding on a donkey. And then they saw Jesus riding on a donkey on Palm Sunday. Oh boy, those visions of what Zechariah was talking about. Oh, this is it. This is going to be when our Jesus will be grabbing power, and we all know that this wasn't true at the time. So the thing is that the words of Zechariah are words of comfort. They have a different power. Like I said, we have the Persians now who are in power. But it is a belief that there will be justice, there will be political order restored in their country, and they're looking for that, and they're excited about that, and we found that really they were still subject to rule by the Persians, so that really wasn't the case there, and there's things that sometimes when you could look at it, and even during these times here, excuse me, that even though the different we have right now currently we have different players and stuff like that and different people, they just get, some of the things that, they were fighting for and they were longing for, not necessarily fighting, but longing for, we're still longing for today. We're looking for justice. We're looking for equitable political harmony and order. We're looking for really restoration of all people. And they were doing the same here. Zechariah describes the king coming as triumphant and victorious, but the king, is also described as humble. And there's like, whoa, how do victorious and triumphant and humble? It seems like a paradox between those two words. And then we did hear correctly, riding on a donkey instead of a war horse. This is a new leader coming. This is not the leaders that we expect, and even today they're not the leaders that we expect. These are humble leaders. They're going to destroy all types of war. They're going to destroy the war horse. They're going to destroy instruments of war, and they're going to command peace to all the nations. And that's sort of even hard to fathom. Just with not only peace in our country, but peace in our world. And it's hard for us as Christians not to place Jesus into this role of a humble leader. But I want to make sure you understand that the word humble does not mean weak. Because if you think about it, is that the word humble in the Old Testament text refers to a person who looks after the lowly, the person who looks after the impoverished or socially unacceptable or vulnerable. And that word is very important there in the Hebrew text that we read. The Old Testament was written in Hebrew, so that word humble is very important. And we look at our Masonic King, our Jesus, who was very much on the side, who identified very much on with the poor and the oppressed. You had in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, one of the first things that Jesus did was cleanse the temple. He got rid of the money changers and the people who were selling. That is not necessarily what we would call a weak person. And then during the Palm Sunday, Jesus enters on a donkey, and then not even a week later, that Jesus will be put to death by the authorities at that time. So we can try to sort of link the two. And Jesus was also known for his humbleness, his gentleness, his giving all his praise to his Father instead of taking it upon himself. So there's a lot of things that are running in my head and that are just thinking about the message at our for our time. This person that Zechariah calls humble, who is in charge of, or who's looking out after the people who are being taken advantage of. And Jesus does the same thing. And so, what is our message for today? That we also should be on this side of the people who are impoverished, people are poor, people who don't have a voice. This is the side that Zechariah is pointing to, and then this is also the side that Jesus was on. And if we're not on that side, we're going to be found on the wrong side of what Jesus and his Father is going to be. And then the last two verses talk about Zechariah turns it just a little bit and turns it to those who have been imprisoned unjustly. That's those verses in 11 and 12. He talks about to proclaim release of the prisoners. And again, this is what I talked about at the beginning, is Zechariah uses terms that the people back at that time would understand. They would read about it and go, oh yeah, great, these people who have been in prison unfairly or unjustly will be set free. He talks about being held captive in a waterless pit. And if we go back to our other Old Testament memories, we found that Joseph, who became the lead, second in command of Egyptians, especially during the plague, not the plagues, but in terms of the 70 years of not being, 70 years of plenty, and then the 70 years of not. And then we have Jeremiah, which we talked about last week. Both of them were thrown into a waterless pit, and both men were innocent. And so they would attach those twos. And then they talked about prisoners of hope. Prisoners of hope, expect their freedom to be given to them. Because if they have hope, they know that they did no wrongdoing. And the final sentence of it is that they would restore with a double portion. And again, we would look at that. I remember, I looked at that before I looked this up, is going, well, a double portion, that seems pretty good. But the double portion back in the Israelites' time, during this time, is you would receive restitution if you were a double amount if you were proven to be innocent. So these are people, those are, in those two verses, Zechariah is saying these three things about people who are in prison unfairly. And, You know, some of you know that we're doing a nice study, I think, a study on racial inequality and racism on Zoom on Wednesday nights, and it's at 7 o'clock. And I encourage you to listen in and you know, come and to broaden your horizon. These are some of the things that I did not know. In 1970, there was approximately 300,000 people in our jail system, 300,000 inmates in our jail system. Currently, we have 2.3 million. What has caused that? In the last 50 years, what has caused? I can't even do the math. It's unbelievable the increase of that. Another one that just clobbered me in terms of if you're a white person, you have a 1 in 17 chance of having prison time, spending time in prison. And I thought that was like, wow, 1 in 17. I know 17 friends. You know, one of us will probably spend prison time. Oh, it gets worse. Hispanic people, 1 in 6. 1 in 6. Black people, 1 in 3. Why is that? Is there a problem in our criminal system that causes this to happen? It's interesting if you do a look on and study on prison labor that we talked about too, and I won't get into that. But it was just eye-opening. You know, some of the things that I found in some of our companies that we rely on. You know, one of my favorite drinks is Diet Dr. Pepper. To find Dr. Pepper uses prison labor to produce their goods. That's like, wow, I didn't know that. But here's the statistic that I found after watching a movie on the criminal injustice, our criminal system. Every 9 people that die because of the death penalty, 1 person is found innocent on death row. So in other words, if we do the math, I could do the math here on this, that 10% of the people on death row are really innocent. Could you hear what Zechariah was talking about when these prisoners are prisoners of hope? They're hoping that they would, you know, that they will be found innocent because they are. And there's a number of organizations that go to, you know, that help with people on death row to, you know, get, you know, proper court, just proper legal help. 10% of the people. That was, I find that that's disturbing. That's very disturbing. And it's disturbing that Zechariah, the people that lived in Zechariah's time, 600 years before Christ, were finding the same issues. Peace of the Lord be with you always.